College Foundation and Alumni Association. I'm John Nelson. I'm the director of the Simon Center for Interagency Leadership, or Ethical Leadership and Interagency Cooperation. That's one of the major programs of the foundation. If you're not familiar with what the foundation does, it's a 501c3 nonprofit that supports the Command and General Staff College. And a lot like a lot of the college alumni associations that you walk around a typical college and you see a building named after somebody because you get all the money from a college, that's sort of what the foundation does, although we don't have buildings named after our donors. What we do is provide those things that the military or the government will not provide because they don't have the money for it. So it's not quite like the 60% that comes from the Alumni Association of the University of Alabama, but we do provide support to the Command and General Staff College in the shape of scholarship, outlook, or outreach, and family support. The Simon Center has a particular focus, and that's on particularly scholarship. And we do that through a couple main areas. One, through our publications and our speaker series are our two areas. And in publications, we do a variety of different things. One is books, like we're going to hear about today from General Caslen and his book on the impossible mission. And then the other thing is the InterAgency Journal, which is our peer-reviewed publication, and it is primarily geared for the staff and faculty of this institution to give you a place where you can submit your papers to get peer review and to be published. But we also have papers from all of our interagency partners. If you're also not familiar with the Command and General Staff College Foundation, I do invite you down to our bookstore afterwards. General Caslen will be down there to sign any copies of his book that you may have desired to purchase. We have also got them available for purchase right here. But if you haven't been down to the bookstore and seen where our offices are, they're just past the barber shop. So please go down there, visit it. You might find some swag that you like. For the past year, I've had a tremendous pleasure. I've been working on two books with the Simon Center, and the one that we're talking about today, The Impossible Mission. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with General Caslen on this. I've learned a lot about the war that we as a country were in for over 20 years, and the story behind it that many of us, including myself, never knew. It's an important story. The one that a lot of the members of the military, or all members of the military and members of our government, particularly those different agencies across the government, really need to hear. And so I'd like to introduce General Caslen by going through a little bit of his bio. Lieutenant General Robert Caslen, Jr. was commissioned as an infantry officer in the United States from the United States Military Academy class of 1975, and he served in the Army for 43 years, retiring in 2018 as the 59th Superintendent of West Point. Before becoming the SUP, General Caslen served as the Chief of the Office of Security Cooperation in Iraq, what we're going to talk about today, and was the commander of the Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth and Commandant of the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. He also commanded the 25th Infantry Division during Operation Iraqi Freedom and was Chief of Staff of both the 101st Airborne and 10th Mountain Divisions, where he served as Chief of Staff of Task Force Mountain during Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. He also served in combat and overseas deployments in Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Honduras, Operation Uphold Democracy, and the United States missions in Haiti. After his military retirement, he served as the 29th President of the University of South Carolina. He holds a doctorate of business administration from Salem University in West Virginia, a recent doctorate, so congratulations, General Caslen. He also has a Master's of Business Administration from Long Island University and a Master of Science degree in Industrial Engineering from K-State. In addition to his many military awards and accomplishments, he is a distinguished graduate of West Point, a member of the K-State Engineering College Hall of Fame, and co-authored the book, The Character Edge, Leading and Winning with Integrity. He was born in Connecticut, grew up in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Vermont. He's been married to the former Michelle Paston from Highland Falls, New York for the past 45 years, and has 3 sons and 5 grandchildren. So, ladies and gentlemen, General Caslen.
Hello, everybody. How you doing? It's good to be with you all. You know, I haven't been away from the Army for as many years as I have. It's just a pleasure to come back and just hang out with people that are part of the service who make a decision to serve our country. So, contrary to the vast majority of your peers who have chosen the safer existence, I have great respect for all of you who have elected to serve your country. All of this occurred, and I'm going to talk about in 2011 to 13. So I'm not sure if you were in the Army in 2011 or 13. This is probably now part of the history books. But it's really about war termination. And I know recently in the news you heard a lot about war termination in Afghanistan. Was it done right? You know, what had happened down there at the airfield? So what I've experienced was the war termination and the transition to the Office of Security Cooperation in Iraq. And I was a senior guy in the middle of all that. And I want to take you through that. Out of war termination and how this transition from the Department of Defense lead to the Department of State lead is really informing. There are some, in my opinion, huge strategic lessons learned. So most of what I'm going to talk to you about is to pull you up to the strategy level, where you now are on staffs of general officers or joint staffs or even coalition staffs, and you're dealing with political problems and, as John had said, interagency issues. Interagency issues downrange, interagency issues back in Washington, D.C., and you're in the mix of all of that, trying to sort it all out, figure it, trying to give advice, trying to give guidance, whether it's heard, not heard, whether it's accepted, not accepted. You're trying to make all of that happen. I had just a very small staff, but there were people exactly like you who had just graduated from CGSC that were on that staff trying to make it happen. And with that background, I just kind of want to tell you a little bit about what my mission was all about. I call it the impossible mission. I just felt there was so much to be learned that at some point in my life when things calmed down, I wanted to write a book about it. I didn't write the book to make any money. I didn't write the book for any other reason but just to share some of these issues with the United States government interagency. Because some of these issues are as important in state and CIA as they are in defense. And really that's my motivation for doing this. Okay, so let me figure out the electronics here. Okay. Going back to 2008 when I was a division commander in northern Iraq, MND North is what they called it. I had responsibility not only for the northern part of Iraq but also Kurdish region. So I had a lot of the Kurd Arab issues. We were in the middle of a huge transition that was taking place in Iraq. And finally, after slogging through about 6 or 7 years, we finally started seeing the light at the tunnel, and maybe this representative democratic government was going to work. I left Iraq as a division commander. I came here to command Fort Leavenworth, and then from here I went back to Iraq to command OSCI, or to be the director of OSCI. When I left Iraq as a division commander and then came back a year later, I was amazed that you had a democratic government that was actually resolving differences through dialogue. This democratic representative government experiment was starting to work. I'm very familiar from my previous tour in Iraq of the Kurd-Arab issues. And they had formed working groups of both Kurds and Arabs at ministerial levels, at the lower levels, all the way to the upper levels. And they were resolving differences through dialogue. And it was actually working. And I was encouraged. I returned in October, and then the transition, expiration of security authorizations and authorities was the end of the year in 31 December. So at the height of when I came back in October, things seemed to be working. What I found out in the next couple months, it all fell apart. So what I have up here is from a representative to an authoritative governance. What had actually taken place is that on 19 December, when the U.S. forces got on the convoy and went south to Kuwait, immediately what happened after that is the Prime Minister Maliki, who is a Shia, of a Shia background, who in his previous life during the Saddam years when he was being persecuted went into exile into Iran and has some very strong Iranian relationships. As soon as U.S. forces left, I was the only one left there with 157 military, by the way. As soon as U.S. forces left, what does the Prime Minister do? He tries to bring the Shia around him. He wants to take charge. He wants to be in charge. He wants to make sure everybody understands that, to include the Sunni. There's a number of divides in the Middle East. One of them is the Sunni-Shia divide. And if you don't have any background and understanding of the Sunni-Shia divide, it's like the Protestants and the Catholics back here in America. It's a faith differences that really stems all the way to the Muhammad days. So Maliki wants to round the power and strengthen his power base. And to do that, any Sunni who was in governance was arrested. He arrested his Sunni deputy prime minister, Mutlaq. He arrested his Sunni vice president, Hashimi. He arrested probably one of the most talented and effective Sunnis that were out there, the Minister of Finance, Asawi, and to make it very clear that he was not favoring Sunni's presence anymore, he took one of the foreign military sales, U.S. M1A1 tanks, and parked it on Asawi's front lawn with the gun pointing right into his house. From the Kurd-Arab side, there were all kinds of Kurd-Arab issues way back in the Middle East. And if there's one thing that unifies Sunni and Shia, it's their, I don't want to use the word hatred, but it's probably, from my perspective, I saw that enough times to call it hatred. There's this hatred with the Kurds. Saddam used gas to kill a bunch of them with gas, and that's how much they didn't like each other. But the Kurds are part of Iraq. There's tons of oil underneath Kurdistan, where they are up there. And the Kurds are not only in northern Iraq, they spill over into Iran, into Syria, and into Turkey. And they've caused a lot of problems, if you understand the history, with their presence in Turkey. So what does he do there? All of the, before I left from a division commander and all those ministerial programs that we put together between the Kurds and the Arabs, Maliki pushed them all away and said, we're not doing it anymore. And I want nothing to do with the Kurds. And all the foreign military sales that was going up to the Peshmerga in northern Iraq, he canceled it all. So the impact was he polarized the Sunnis, he polarized the Kurds in order to consolidate power, and then what you had was authoritative governance. It was really interesting. So I concluded, I said, what was the purpose of the military, the U.S. military? Was the purpose of the U.S. military, was it the purpose of it out there so that, I lost my train of thought here for a second, but what's the purpose of the military going out all there? And in my opinion, it was to provide security for the national security for Iraq. But what really happened in Iraq was it was a deterrent for Maliki to do what he actually did. So all the foot soldiers fled during the surge. They now came back in force, and the Subal tribal leaders gave safe haven. So what really was the impact of what Maliki had done, because it had backfired, is that he created the perfect trifecta. He had radical Sunni leadership that was incarcerated during the 8.5 years of American presence released. You had radical Sunni soldiers that in the surge went over to Syria, had returned, and then he upset all of the radical leaders, all of the Sunni leaders in northern Iraq, and they provided the safe haven for the retraining and the reorganization. And it was the rebirth of what I call the rebirth of ISIS. They rebuilt their caliphate, and then what happened after that was U.S. forces returned a few years later, and I was there for the whole process to see how the government had disseminated, how the Sunnis had retaliated. They built ISIS, and they built the caliphate, and then the U.S. forces returned to deal with that. So it was really unfortunate to see all of the work that had been put in place for 8.5 years, now just in a short period of time, had come apart. What I want to talk a little bit now is life without a security forces agreement. One of the challenges we had was to put together our security force agreement had expired when U.S. forces left on 31 December. And because we lost a security agreement, we also lost the security forces agreement. The security forces agreement gives us the privilege of being in the country of Iraq, and the jurisdiction of bad behavior was dealt with by the United States. It was not dealt with by the Iraqis. And that security of forces was important to our congressional and our government, the United States government back here in Washington. So what had happened on the security of forces agreement was that it disappeared. And because it disappeared, President Obama had made the decision to withdraw all U.S. forces. There was an option that there might have been, and I'll talk about this, there was some option that might have had a residual force remaining. But as soon as the U.S. forces left on the 19th of December, all that was left in OSCI was 157 military, and I had 760 contractors that were doing the training for the foreign military sales. On the 19th of December, as soon as they crossed the border into Kuwait, Iraq had arrested one of my contract drivers. I got a call from the ambassador. He said, "You got one of your drivers arrested down there in southern Iraq, and he's got resupply that's coming up not only for you, but also for our embassy." He said, "Can you try to work with your contacts to get him released?" And I said, "Why was he arrested?" "Because he had no paperwork that authorized him to be in Iraq." I said, "None of us have paperwork that authorizes us to be in Iraq. So we're all subject to be arrested because we no longer had authority from the Iraqi government to be there. It disappeared. So this guy now crosses the border, goes in Iraq, gets arrested. Iraq wants to make a statement that we are now sovereign. And then all of the resupply came to a screeching halt. And then everything was backed up at the border down in Kuwait. Iraq was demanding not only the paperwork, visas, but they were also demanding taxes. And we had no knowledge of all of this at all going into it. If you know a theater that's out there in a combatant command like CENTCOM, CENTCOM has an Army component, a Navy, and an Air Force component. The Army component is called RCENT. So when the U.S. forces left, that was the authorization from law called Title 10. And then what was left was the State Department running Title 22. I'm calling down there to my buddy in RCENT saying, "I need some help, I need some resupply." And he says, "Sorry, you are now a Title 22, I'm a Title 10, and I don't have the authority to, as a Title 10, to give you anything as a Title 22. So we can no longer help you." So now we're just finding this stuff out as it's happening. No one had war gamed the way through this transition that we would lose Title 10 authority to do stuff because now the State Department was in charge and we were strictly a Title 22 organization. And I talked to my RCENT buddy. I said, please, I really need some help. He goes, sorry, can't help you. His lawyers wouldn't let him help it. It was amazing. So now we began the process of getting visas. And Iraq had never issued visas, so they didn't know how to issue visas. So, you know, the United States government back here in Washington is helping the Iraqi embassy on how to issue visas. But we couldn't do anything because we didn't have a visa. We were all stuck on our base. That became an issue in itself, because not only do you need American authorities to be in Iraq, you also need Iraqi authorities to allow you to be there. So they came up to us and said, let me see the paperwork of you being authorized to be on this base. I'm doing a foreign military sales. They said, you're Americans, you have no authority to be here. And they say, well, show me your paperwork. Show me your visa. Of course, we didn't have it. So we had to work very quickly, and we got the Prime Minister to give us an exception to policy for about 30 days, and it was amazing. But in the meantime, our contractors were nervous. All of this was unraveling. The military protection of U.S. forces had disappeared, and they didn't like being there under those conditions. So of the 700 plus contractors, almost all of them went home. And that was my mission, because my mission was really foreign military sales and the training of it. And it was just amazing. So CENTCOM didn't like what was going on, and CENTCOM said, here is a be prepared order to evacuate all of your OSCI, all of your personnel, to include your contractors, and go to Kuwait. Matter of fact, we had the big debate on Christmas Eve on the telephone. I was with the ambassador. We were talking to the National Security Council on whether or not we should leave Iraq or not. They were advocating we should. And I tried to make the case. These are to the national security members who were on that phone call. I said, we have 8.5 years. We have over 4,000 lives, another 3,000 contractor lives. We have a tremendous opportunity to build a representative governance in one of the most ugliest places in the world, and we're just going to abandon it all because we haven't thought through how we get authorities to be here. So they said, okay, you got another week to get them. So sure enough, we worked our butt off, and we worked with the Minister of Defense and the Prime Minister, and they wrote a piece of paper saying they are authorized to be here, and it saved our life, really. I got on that slide a couple of heroes. And the USO was a big hero, Sloan Gibson, my West Point classmate and a good friend. When we shut down Iraq and everybody went home, all the PXs went home, all the haircut people went home, everybody went home. The people that were cashing your checks and your little ID cards that you had in theater, your little credit cards, all of that disappeared. And Sloan Gibson said, Sloan, I need some help. So he was from the USO, so he started shipping all kinds of stuff for us to help us, snacks and things like that. We weren't even getting food. We were on MREs. And somehow that got through. I don't know how he did it, but he's one of my big heroes. General Goldfein from AFCENT had a different perspective than ARCENT. And he says, Caslen, whatever you need, I'm going to help you. I said, sir, I need airplanes. Fly in here, fly people in here, fly in supplies in here. And sure enough, that's what he did. And I give him great credit for that. Plus, because we couldn't cash a check and we had those little credit cards, the management of all that credit card system, those of you that used it, you know what I'm talking about. One of his finance people down in AFCENT was able to fly up there on one of the airplanes and help us cash all our checks and give us some money at least to get a haircut. So that was life without a security force agreement. One of the issues was, should there be a residual force? So when the U.S. forces left on the 19th of December, what was going to follow them in behind, And obviously the foreign military sales managed by OSCI was one thing. That was 157 people. But the issue became your national security objectives. What are your national security objectives? Like a free and democratic and representative governance in the middle of the Middle East. military that can prevent external and internal threats and provide the security for the nation. Those are some of your national security objectives. So how are you going to maintain those national security objectives? Defense now is second, is subordinate to state. Embassies got responsibility for that. A lot of these are defense tasks and objectives that have to be handled. And then there was initial guidance that in order to put that together and to assist Iraq in providing security was going to be a residual force. Similar to, after the 1953 armistice, well, however you pronounce it, in South Korea. The best case was going to be 10,000 soldiers from the 3rd Infantry Division. Matter of fact, when I got there in October, the 3rd Infantry Division commander was actually doing his reconnaissance, and I was applauding that. NATO was also doing a training mission, and that was NMTI, commanded by an Italian 2-star general. He was really good. That was a really effective program, had a lot of respect from from Iraq. And then was the OSCI, the Foreign Military Sales. The worst case, when the national security deputies got together, they said, we give authority for 157 military to do OSCI. That's it. And the best case was going to be the 10,000 person division, which never materialized. President Obama at Camp Lejeune, when he took office, gave a war termination speech that I think everybody forgot. He put out some very clear guidance that we were going to leave Iraq at the end of 2011 when the security agreement expires, and we will not seek to get another one. Well, I don't know. A lot of people didn't pay much attention to that because I'm running around knowing I'm going to command the residual force. I'm told it's going to happen. Defense tells me it's going to happen. And then I get a phone call from Lieutenant General Doug Lute, who is the Deputy National Security Advisor. He calls me up before I leave. He says, Bob, come on over here. I got to talk to you. I said, yes, sir. What do you want? He says, read my lips. There is no residual force. I said, sir, defense is putting one together. You got a division commander already doing his reconnaissance. You got a division. I'm told I'm going to command it. Read my lips. There is no residual force. I said, okay. So I got an airplane very shortly afterwards, flew over to Iraq, met with General Austin, who was the 4-star commander, and the ambassador, pulled him aside. I said, sir, I got to tell you about this conversation I had with General Lute. Their words was, don't worry about it. It's not going to happen. I said, well, I am worried about it. They said, he referred the President of the United States saying it was war termination. This is the disconnect that's going on between agencies, and even within the Department of Defense government. It's a political environment that I found myself, even as a 3-star general, unprepared to operate in it. Not to mention my staff that had to deal with all of this craziness as well. And they did, but we did. We worked through it as best we could. What was tied to the residual force was whether or not the Iraqi legislature was going to approve a new status of forces agreement. And they finally said they were not going to approve it. It was an issue of sovereignty, and they had gone without sovereignty for 8 years. And they were proud. They wanted to get their sovereignty back, and they said, we will now take this on our own. Obviously, they couldn't because ISIS came back, U.S. forces introduced themselves a year later, and they had to eliminate the ISIS threat, the internal threat that they have. But nevertheless, because we couldn't get a security forces agreement, President Obama said we're not going. But he already said we're not going anyway. That was just confirmation that said we're not going. What made matters worse was NATO. They were not going to get a security force agreement either. NATO said, we're not going to be there. So now I had NATO saying they're not going to be there. United States, 10,000-man division minus, not going to be there. So what's left to preserve the national security interests of U.S. presence and other coalition presence in Iraq? What's left? 157 OSCI people. and 7,000 contractors with the same national security objectives that we had. It was a mess, to say the least. That's why I said in the middle of this, I said, someone's got to write a book about this because this is just really crazy. I want to talk a little bit about Iranian influence and curb to arrow issues. Then I want to talk about whether or not our presence there was worth the investment and a couple lessons learned. When I was a division commander, General Odierno was the four-star commander. He was very sensitive to the Iranian influence that was going on in the war to bring stability to Iraq. And he had said this quote that one thing I don't want to do is to bring Iraq to Iran as a presence. The Shia leadership of Iraq with the withdrawal, with the removal of Saddam Hussein, had close ties to Iran. As I told you, the prime minister was in exile in Iran. So you had that Sunni Shia divide that was in there. I really underestimated and did not have the knowledge. You know, you're supposed to go into these operations understanding the environment. But what I failed to really, truly understand was the depth of mistrust that existed between Sunni and Shia, and the depth of mistrust that existed between Kurds and Arabs. And the Sunni Shia thing really just surprised me. I remember sitting in a meeting with Prime Minister Maliki, and he said, the Neo-Ottoman Empire is the greatest Islamic threat to Iraq. I said, what do you mean? Who is the Neo-Ottoman Empire? Well, if you go back to the Ottoman Empire, you know, it's Turkey's in charge of the whole thing way back 100 or so years ago. But it's a Sunni-dominated presence over a minority Shia. And I failed to really understand the depth of mistrust that a Shia person like Maliki would have against any Sunnis that are out there. And I said, what does what does Turkey have to do with what's going on down here? He said it has to do with everything because it motivates those who we must mistrust the most, and that is the Sunni. And then if you go look back, if you remember, Osama bin Laden was a Sunni. Zarqawi was a Sunni. Zarqawi was the one that went in there into Iraq in order to create all of the north to be part of Sunni Iraqi again. But these are all the complications that I personally learned as quickly as I could to understand the nature of the environment that we were operating in. Of course, Iran's Saddam's war with Iran and the Iranian Shia refugees during the Saddam's years. Here's one that's very interesting, and this brings you a little bit up to current events. Iran had publicly vowed to destroy Israel. And the way they wanted to do that is they wanted to put all of their forces by ground across the land bridge from the Iranian border through Iraq, through Syria, into Lebanon, and stage into Lebanon for destruction of Israel. The land bridge over Iraq was essential, and Iran was not going to not let that happen. I knew it was ugly, and I knew there were Iranian forces coming through Iraq, and I stood there one time on the Iranian border, and a convoy of about 12 trucks from Iran came with soldiers in the back, came screaming through into Syria to go fight into Lebanon. But that land bridge was so tremendously important. That's why Iranian influence in Iraq became so tremendously important, and the influence Iran had over Iraq as a result. And then, of course, Iran had their own militias, Kataib, Hezbollah, Sabah al-Haq, and the Promised Day Brigade. Iran also knew that OSCI was involved in bringing the foreign military sales to Iraq. One day, Prime Minister Maliki, and I'm briefing him on how the FMS program's going, and he says, what are you doing to prevent the F-16s from flying into the Iraqi buildings? And I go, sir, what is that? What are you asking me? An F-16 is going to fly into one of your buildings? He goes, yes. You're going to pre-program them so that the pilot has no longer any control, and the plane's going to fly by itself into one of our buildings. How are you going to stop that? I said, sir, where'd you hear that from? Well, come to find out, Iran is feeding him with all of this potential controversial stuff that I had no earthly idea. And he believed them. And he was emphatic that I had to prove to him that the F-16 airplanes were not going to be pre-programmed to fly into Iraqi buildings. Iranian influence. If that was a story that was believed by the Prime Minister of Iraq from Iran, you can only imagine what else he is being told by Iran about what's going on with his relationship with the United States. All of this stuff is really interesting and is important to understand. The third-party strike, that also was part of Iranian influence because the CENTCOM commander, General Mattis, would come into theater maybe once or about 3 times a year. And he would go down to Qatar where his CENTCOM headquarters and theater is. He would invite all of the theater commanders down, including myself, and I'd go there for a week. And all we talked about was third-party strike. At the end of the last day, he gave Afghanistan, Iraq, and Pakistan 15 minutes to give an update of what's going on in your country. And we spent the rest of the week, six days in the rest of the time, talking about third-party strike. Third-party strike is what actually occurred when the United States went in there and blew up the Iranian nuclear weapon infrastructure. And they had realized that because Israel knew that they were not going to tolerate it and they were going to preempt the strike, similar to what they did in Iraq when Iraq had a nuclear program going on many years ago. And so there was nothing that was going to stop Iran, only that we coached them not to go so fast so we can study it. It was pretty amazing, but we went through that war game 3 times a year, over and over and over again. And I call that Iranian influence because it really influenced my military boss to address issues that, of course, I was interested in, but he didn't have the time of day to talk about some of the issues from Iraq that I needed to talk to him about. But nevertheless, I understood the nature of the beast and I understood the nature of a third-party strike. And believe it or not, that third-party strike with us going in there occurred exactly the way it was programmed and planned when I was over there 7 years ago or 8 years ago. And we practiced it. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about a little bit, and you heard me mention it, is the Kurd-Arab issues. So northern Iraq is Kurdistan. It's got 3 provinces. They're Iraqi Protestants. As I said, they're an ethnic group that not only is in northern Iraq, but they spill over into Iran, Turkey, and in Syria. And I'll tell you, Syria and Iran, and especially Turkey, are very sensitive to the progress that the Turks may have, that the Kurds may have in Iraq. The capital of Kurdistan, of all the Kurds up in that region, is in Iraq, in northern Iraq. But interestingly enough, this all happened at the end of World War II when they drew the borders. And the Kurds end up being the largest ethnic group in the world that doesn't have their own country. And oh, how they wish they did. When I was the division commander and went over to Iraq, I wasn't on the ground maybe 2 weeks, and all of a sudden I got this frantic phone call from my brigade commander who was up in Kirkuk. Kirkuk is the kind of the area that's on the border between, right near where the Kurds live. There's a lot of mix between Kurds and Arabs that are up in that area. There's tons of oil fields underneath Kirkuk. And there was my brigade commander. I don't know if he invited or they just happened to show up, but the Kurdish commander and the Iraqi commander, both 1-star generals, were in the meeting with him. And it got so ugly, they pulled their guns and started facing each other, ready to shoot each other in a shootout in the middle of his office. And he calls me up and says, "Sir, I need some help. Can you get up here now?" It's an hour helicopter flight from where my headquarters is. He goes, sir, I need you. Get up here, please. So no kidding. So I get the helicopters, standby. They come pick me up. I fly up there, and sure as hell, I walk into his headquarters, and there's a Kurdish general and an Iraqi general, and they have their pistols pointed at each other, and they're yelling and screaming. And they must have been doing that for an entire hour that I was flying up there. I guess, I don't know. Anyway, that was my introduction to the Kurd-Arab issues. So I had to learn fast I had no idea getting ready to go to Iraq as a division commander that these type of issues were present. And so it was ugly, but fortunately we got them to calm down. I put them in separate rooms. I listened to the grievances of one, and I listened to the grievance of the other. I brought them together. I got them to at least agree not to shoot each other. I got them committed to at least trust me to help work some of these issues through now that I'm the new commander on site. All of those sorts of things, and it did. But there's so many drivers I have on that slide, what I call drivers of instability. The massive oil reserves that are there. A lot of that oil, the Kurds believes belongs to them, but the prime minister of Iraq will pull that oil and sell it on the free market, and the government of Iraq, not the government of Kurdistan, will get all the profits. So all oil profits in Iraq, the rule is that you're going to get a certain percentage based on your per capita population. And Kurdistan is 17%. So even though they own all the oil, it's being shipped out, they only get 17% profits, and they resent that immensely. And then there's the Peshmerga. The Peshmerga is the military of the Kurds, and the Iraqis say, you live in Kurdistan, you're a military, you live in Iraq. You're a military in Iraq, you belong to the Iraqi government, not the Kurdistan government. So we went through all of that craziness and had to get it sorted out. When we left, before the withdrawal, we had this thing called the CSM, Combined Security Mechanism, and I give a lot of credit to General Odierno for putting this together. What we did is we established checkpoints along the controversial border. And then we had, on those checkpoints, an Iraqi, a U.S., and a Kurdish soldier. And then around those checkpoints, we had a headquarters. And within the headquarters, we had all three nations in the headquarters as well. And then we created, as part of this, ministerial meetings at the 1-star level, then at the 4-star level. And the ministerial meetings were to address any grievances that existed. So one of the things that happened with the withdrawal of U.S. forces, because they could no longer manage this, was that Maliki dismantled the CSM. So we no longer had the conversations at all levels. We no longer had 3 people in checkpoints. Well, it was 2 because U.S. forces went home. So no longer were you having those bipartisan checkpoints. And it was really unfortunate. We were involved in the negotiations, we the military, and we ended up being OSCI. I had a lot of experience with this, as you can imagine, as a division commander. And then when I went back, they trusted the U.S., and they trusted the U.S. military. In the irony of interagency craziness, the Department of State, God bless them, the Department of State said, we are a Title 22 organization now. Caslen, you are a Title 10. You no longer have the authority to be a negotiator between Kurd-Arab issues. So they pulled the chain on me and said, you're not negotiating anymore. Simply because of this interagency conflict between Title 10 and Title 22. So this is I'm just kind of laying the groundwork of what you can expect when you're going to be on a staff dealing with issues like that. God bless my ambassador. He finally said, this is crazy. He finally called up State Department and says, the Kurds don't listen to anybody except the United States military. Put the United States military back into negotiations, would you please? They were reluctant because they considered that Title 10 mission. But nevertheless, they finally approved it in support of the ambassador. And it is what it is. All right, I know I want to proceed through this as quickly as I can and take some questions. So as Iraq worth the investment? We'll probably debate this for a long time. Is Iraq worth the investment? So the financial costs were billions, trillions of dollars, $5 trillion, 13 trillion, I think it was, I forget exactly. The human cost was over 4,000 American lives, another 3,000 contractor lives, also Americans. How many of you know what I mean by a strategy of preemption? So we entered the war by initiating it. We did not enter the war in reaction to some aggression against the United States. First time in U.S. history that we entered war preemptively, and we went into Iraq preemptively. A lot of debate whether that was ethically correct or not, but nevertheless, the decision was made to do it. Positive outcomes: Saddam was gone, a representative, transparent government occurred. The fifth largest, don't lose track of that, the fifth largest oil reserves in the world exist in that country. And there were some ethnic and sectarian groups that were defeated. But here's what you really have to wonder whether this is going to be worth it or not. And you can probably gauge this next sentence against what's going on right now in Israel and in Gaza with what's going on there. What is the potential of a representative government in the middle of the Middle East? How would you value that? With generations and generations of hatred and mistrust, you now have a government that is allowing opposing groups to come together to resolve differences through dialogue rather than through authoritative measures and means. Is that worth it? And Iraq was there. They were there. They actually did, over the last 7 years, they actually knew a whole lot better than what we thought they were going to do. But they are. They are a representative governor in the middle of the Middle East. And then what does that impact all the other governments that are out there? It shows them a model and it gives hope. How much is that worth? Was Iraq worth the investment? And then, of course, all of us have to ask ourselves whether we're living lives worthy of the sacrifice of those 4,000 soldiers and contractors that gave their life for this mission. Okay, let me talk a little bit about lessons learned, and then I'll open it up to questions. I could talk probably an hour for each one of these, but let me just hit them. I talked about keeping a democratic government democratic. The U.S. forces were not there to provide security for Iraq. They were there to keep the democratic government democratic. Because what Maliki did to unravel the democratic government and become authoritative again by arresting everybody, it only occurred, and he only did it when U.S. forces left, because he knew he was going to be held accountable. And when the U.S. forces left, our ability to hold him accountable evaporated. Most people will say we're going to commit U.S. forces to provide security. Here's an example of the commitment of U.S. forces to keep a democratic government democratic. It's kind of an irony, but it's the fact of the matter is it's the truth of what actually happened. When you get war fatigue and you want to terminate a war, that's 2 and 3. Departing the war does not necessarily terminate a war. We had thought that sending everybody home was going to terminate the war. It didn't. It exasperated it. So you had the rebirth of ISIS, the creation of the caliphate, and then U.S. forces had to return. When I was the superintendent of West Point, we have this annual award that's given to a United States American citizen who best exemplifies the West Point motto of duty, honor, and country. And when I was a superintendent, one of the years I was there, we gave it to Madam Albright, former Secretary of State. Wonderful, wonderful lady. And when she was talking to the cadets, she told the story. Her family's an immigrant from Eastern Europe during the Russian invasion time frame and all that after World War II and all that craziness. And she came to the United States as a child. And she now is into national security. And she's told the cadets, beware of war fatigue. And the example she used was the war fatigue of Western Europe after World War I, that they failed to engage an emerging tyrant Adolf Hitler because of the fatigue that they still had experienced and hadn't gotten over from World War I. And they failed to keep their focus on national security issues, and they focused internally on fatigue instead. She used that analogy to explain to the cadets exactly what was going on in Afghanistan and Iraq with the United States. And she said, I'm worried, she goes, the United States is becoming fatigued of a protracted war. And they're looking at the protraction of the war rather than the national security issues instead. And to me, it kind of said, holy shit, you know, it's pretty enlightening. So, the consequences of war fatigue. Number 4, coordinated effort among government departments must accurately determine realistic strategic objectives post-withdrawal. The strategic objectives post-withdrawal is to keep Iraq secure, to provide for its security, to keep its government representative. Those were the national security interests. And there were 50,000 U.S. forces that were providing for that security. And then when they all left, there was only 157 left that was going to provide for that, for those national security issues. Crazy. It wasn't going to happen. But the point of the matter is, what is your national security interest? What are your strategies to achieve them? What are the resources you need for your strategy? And 157 wasn't going to cut it. Authorities are more important than resourcing. You can give me all the resources I need, but if I don't have the authority to be in Iraq, whether it's American authority or Iraqi authority, it's all for naught. So we can't keep our eye off of the fact that authorities are important. And this is a congressional issue. Congress is the one that provides the legal right for you to be there. And when those legal rights expire, someone's got to recognize ahead of time that you've got to go back and get them extended. And we fail to do that. It's amazing. Why we fail, I have no idea. It's another book you can write. Privileges are more important than protections and immunities. Got it. We got so hung up on immunities that we did not want to see an American in an Iraqi prison because of some criminal activity. That we lost focus on the privileges that were necessary to be there and to be able to execute our tasks and our missions. Number 7 talks about even though there's a strong partnership on the ground, it cannot offset a strained Department of Defense, Department of State relationship in Washington. I'm running out of time, but I could talk a lot about the ugliness between state and defense. It's embarrassing. It's unfortunate. We got to fix that. We can't fight another war the way we fought this between defense and state. You read the book, you'll see some examples. We must have realistic expectations of the task the embassy will assume. When U.S. forces left, they said, okay, the embassy is now going to fly drones, and they're going to fly aircraft in and out. They're going to fly. Anyway, they had a whole list of military stuff that the State Department was going to run from the embassy, and that was crazy. We also thought they were going to run the police program, which was a $1 billion program, and they implemented it and they approved it, and then, believe it or not, the Iraq Minister of Interior said, we don't want your police program anymore. So we had $1.4 billion for a police program that Iraq did not want. Interesting. Trying to Americanize the Iraqi military does not work. I had a visit when I was OSCI from the AMC commander, 4 stars. He was very involved as a 3 and 2-star in building the maintenance supply system for the Iraqis. It was all automated, similar to what we do here in America. So I meet him, I bring him down. He wants to see where the supplies are located. He walks in. There's a whole shelf of stuff. He picks with spare parts on it. He picks up one spare part covered with dust, picks up the spare part, no dust underneath it. And then He's looking around, and there's a couple guys sitting behind their computer, and he recognized the computer's not on. And he says, how come the computer's not on? How are you going to order any parts? And how long has that part been sitting there since it's got all dust on top of it? The Iraqi counterpart was just totally embarrassed. And I hadn't done any pre-checks for this visit. I should have. And I'm there saying, I can't believe what I'm seeing. And then he asked one of the Iraqis, well, how come your computer's not on? Well, I don't have any power, sir. Well, how come you don't have any power? Because the generator's broke, sir. How come the generator's broke? How long has it been broke? Oh, for a couple months. No kidding, this is the conversation. And so why was the generator not fixed? Because the garrison was responsible to fix it, and he refused to fix it. So they were not going to fix it. So the whole center of gravity of their maintenance system was the computer program and the whole process of ordering, just simply because you didn't have any power, because you didn't have a generator, because you had no gas, and the generator wasn't working anymore. Your whole supply system broke apart. So here we are trying to Americanize the Iraqi supply system. Here's how they were getting resupply. So I went over to one of the armor generals, division commanders, and I said, I really got interested in this. I said, how are you getting your spare parts? You're not getting them through the American system anymore. That doesn't work. So I said, how are you getting them? He said, well, we always get them. I said, well, how's that? He said, I bring the part down to the local guy that builds spare parts and works with metal and stuff like that. I forget the word. He goes, I bring it down to him, and he makes the part, and then I bring it back and I put it in the tank, and it works. It's the way we always do it. So here we are trying to Americanize the Iraqi military, and they're very nice. They say, yes, sure, we'll help you. When it comes time and you got to go home, they'll revert right back to where they were in the first place. I got lots of stories like that. Anyway, it just was crazy that we were trying to Americanize the Iraqi military. Don't try to Americanize another military. That's my opinion. Just find out the way they operated and get those systems back in place and upgrade them if you can. Last thing I have up there is our Title 22 Foreign Military Sales must transition to the 21st century. The Foreign Military Sales Programs is built in a Cold War army. And we're out of the Cold War. The organizations and nations, militaries that need foreign military sales also need other assets. They need the collective training. They need an exercise program. They need lessons learned. They need building doctrine. These are all Title 10 duties and responsibilities. But we've just experienced a situation where Title 10 responsibilities and foreign military sales is not approved, and it's not welcomed by those who own the Foreign Military Sales Program, which is Title 22, Department of State. We have to fix that. So if any of you ever are involved in foreign military sales again, and you have these Title 10, 22 issues, just remember this and take it back with you, and find out what the environmental requirements are, and build the programs that will get there. And then assign the Title 10 or 22 authority. Okay, sorry I ran over. I could talk forever, but back to you, John. Any questions?
We do have time for one question, but the way we'll do this, we have time on the calendar for one question, but if you've got to go at the witching hour, feel free to go. But if you want to stay on and ask for another questions, I'll give General Caslen, or he'll take it from you, one of the others, the mic for the next 5 or 10 minutes. So, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a picture, by the way, this is a picture of the Prime Minister Maliki sitting with General Odierno. He came over Christmas. And then on the right side are all his Prime Minister's staff. And on the left side is the ambassador, and then myself. I'm there taking notes. But that was where we had our meetings with the Prime Minister. And the guy in the middle there is the translator. Okay. Who had a question? Yeah. That means structural issues with who?
Just as you only had 100% personnel rather than the 10,000. What were some of the structural issues you had working then with the Iraqis?
Yeah, well, what we did is we had, I think, if I remember now, 7 or 8 bases across the country where we had the foreign military sale program going on. So we had one for artillery, one for the aviation, one for the F-16s. We had another one for air defense, and each one was on a separate base. So I probably had maybe 3 or 4 military on that base, maybe 20 or so contractors, depending on the size of the program, and the rest were the Iraqis they're working with. Our security for the base was provided by foreign, third country security personnel, mostly from Nepal and places like that. They came in and they were phenomenal security, but they provided the security, perimeter security and entrance exit security as well. But the way that we were operating on was that we were on Iraqi property, we were on Iraqi bases with just a few Americans, both military and contractors, training the Iraqis, and the base was owned by Iraq. This then became another issue. The issue was, since the base was owned by Iraq, where is your authority, Mr. American soldier, to be on my property? You know, so we had to seek Iranian authority to be able to get them there. And that was the crux of the Christmas Eve speech there with the National Security Council. How do we get Iraqi approval and Iraqi authority for us to reside and do work on their basis? None of this was addressed in the transition. It was all, you wake up in the morning, what's your problem today? Let's try to work it out, you know? So those of you who are going to be planners someday, I mean, you got to war game all of these issues ahead of time and the environment that you're going to be operating in. None of them were addressed. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, sir. Major Rochelle Markowitz, military intelligence officer. So my next assignment will be at Arson. I'll be the branch chief for their...
Don't tell them I spoke badly about them.
I won't. So I'll be the branch chief for their foreign intelligence and engagements branch. And so a lot of what I'll be doing is I'll be traveling to and from the CENTCOM AOR, planning a lot of the engagement, security, cooperation activities. So I guess my question for you is, based on your experience, how can I best prepare for that position to be successful, especially working with our interagency?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, you got to understand the internal, external threats of the nation and then the internal, external threats of the region, and have a good understanding, and making sure they understand it in the same prism and vision that you see it as, so that you have a common understanding of what the adversary is. And then you sit down and say, well, how are you addressing this problem set? That's kind of what I would do. One of the objectives that I had was to put an American intel person nested into the Iraqi intel apparatus for the purposes of mentoring and coaching. The other purpose was that they had immediate visibility of what's going on in their intel world. That wasn't the necessary purpose of putting them there, but that was a side benefit of doing that. When lost my train of thought again. But when the U.S. forces left, and General Austin left, before he left, he and the ambassador, Jim Jeffries, put together a small Title 10 intel group into the Iraqi intel for the purpose of coaching and mentoring them. There was no purchase of foreign military sales. So by definition, it was strictly a Title 10 mission. It was so helpful and beneficial to have them embedded so that they had visibility, and they mentored them, and they really became pretty good. But because it was a Title 10 mission, and Title 22 State Department realized that we were doing a Title 10 mission, we thought that was tremendously important to the overall mission. We had to pull them out because Title 10 was no longer authorized for us to be here and do it. So, you got to, in other words, these are good things to do, but you got to make sure that you understand whether or not you have the authorities to do them or not. And it was clear that the State Department felt we no longer had that authority with the transition of departments.
Question? Yes, sir. Sir, Major, you had some from the Jamaica
In where? Haiti? Oh, I've been there.
It's very new for us. We've done peacekeeping before, but at this scale, it's something that most of our commanders are going to be going into. What lessons from your experience and generally as well would you give us to go into that sort of environment, especially working with other countries that may not operate in the way that we're used to?
Yeah, so I had just completed battalion command as a brand new, I wasn't in 06 yet, I was still in 05. And 25th Division went to Haiti, and I was a battalion commander in 25th Division. I went to Haiti with them, and since I was a former battalion commander, they gave me the task and responsibility to stand up the Haitian National Police and to make it a professional organization that was treating Haitian citizens correctly. So if you're going to stand up the Haitian National Police, I just need some help on how to do that because I come from a military background. But in my opinion, a lot of the work that you have to do is going to be tied to the Haitian, how Haitian provides for their internal security. I don't know if they have a military anymore or if they still just use the National Police. Do you know? National Police? What's your role going to be in there? You just really have to define what your role is going to be. Are you going to have an oversight and mentor, or are you going to be an operational organization? So once you sort out if you're going to be operational or mentor, ideally you want to be a mentor so you can build them up and train and develop them so that they have the skill sets and the resources necessary to do what they're doing. You coming in there in the background, you know what right looks like. So you know what the skill sets are required, and you also know what the equipment and the resources are. And because of that, you can advise them on what they need to do, and then of course train them as well. So.
Anything else? Right over here.
Sir, Chaplain Spalla from SAMS. Sir, when you're talking about working with other GOs, getting perhaps conflicting information, what in your experience and your preparation gave you the ability to be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove as you're trying to sense-make the environment?
Yeah. You mean with GOs? With coalition or American GOs?
All types of GOs and political leaders, sir.
Yeah. First of all, you got to get rid of your ego, in my opinion. Then you try to build a relationship. It can be a friend relationship or it can be a professional relationship. One that gives you the option of calling them, and one that allows them to understand that they could call you and that you give them good reason to call you. In the end, what you want to do is you really want to build some trust between the two of you. It can be professionally or without trust, but trust is the most effective element of leadership. So if you're going to lead peers, particularly senior level peers, you really got to be able to build a trust between the two of you. One of the challenges in the United States military, don't repeat this, of senior leaders, not all senior leaders, is the ego. And the ego ends up getting in the way a lot. So you just got to understand how to work around through the ego. I mean, ironically, one of the most effective elements of leadership is to learn how to be a followership. And to be a follower, you've got to understand your boss, you've got to understand the guidance and intent, you've got to understand when he's on, I'm giving you guidance, I'm giving you intent, this is what I ask you to do, as compared to I want your feedback. And you can't be afraid to provide that feedback that's necessary, particularly that's something that may be embarrassing to them. But you have the candor to be able to speak truth to power, and you got to be able to do that. But in the end, it's how do I build a trust relationship with that person? So, good question. Chaplains get in the middle of helping bridge that. or you're a sounding board, yeah. So I've used my chaplain for that quite a bit. All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you.